Well, friends, last week, for those who were here, at the end, we decided to take on a practice, or we were invited to take on a practice, and that was in the spirit of self-reflective learning, to look at one part of our life where we had, something became routine, where we weren't paying attention, where it was rote, and just to see what might have happened. What might happen if we just observe it and see, well, let me just watch without judgment, without being self-critical, without even trying to fix it, to just see what's something I'm doing. Is it brushing my teeth? Is it doing the dishes? What I decided to do was I would look at how I was showing up and what I was feeling and what I was doing during my various Zoom classes, which I will be happy to share with everyone some of my observations. But before I do, I thought I would just open the door. Hey, Paul, glad you could make it. Yael, welcome. So how did, for those of you who tried this, or even if you didn't, how did this idea of self-reflective learning or watching yourself show up? Did anything interesting happen that you'd like to share?
As I chop vegetables, I stopped trying to think of it as a chore. But it's something I do to serve people.
And did you notice it? Oh, yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Carol.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was doing the dishes, but also the other chore I really find rather odious is emptying the dishwasher. And I decided when I emptied the dishwasher, I would be aware of my body movements. And because I've got 3 shelves, how far did I have to reach for each shelf? What was my body doing when I reached for that 3rd shelf I'm fairly tall, so I can reach the first few shelves without too much trouble. And it was interesting to see how my body was moving. And also I was aware when I was washing the dishes of how the water felt on my hands, how hot it was, and the texture of the dishes. So it was pretty interesting and more enjoyable than just saying, okay. And I left the radio off. Usually I'll turn on the radio when I'm doing the dishes. And I said, no, I'm going to leave the radio off. I won't be distracting myself with Terry Gross or whatever. And I'll just pay attention to the dishes. And it was a different experience.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone else have an experience they'd like to share?
You know, I've been watching the comments that go on in my brain and trying not to let them all come out of my mouth. Especially at home with my wife as we go about things like cleaning the dishes or emptying the dishwasher, or just little things that you think about in your head that you can comment on, that I try to be more in silence for it, that they're not important to bring out. So I've been watching those comments.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that's very similar to my practice. I was watching myself. Paul, I'll get to you in just a sec. And I actually was like, I had my little notebook for my class notes, and then in the margins, I would write notes about what I was observing about myself, and the amount of judgment that was going on about the teachers going too fast, now they're going too slow, and I want to read my phone, now this person's asking a 3rd question, shouldn't they give somebody else a turn? And it was a huge amount of energy was just spent in judgment. So really trying to I think this week when I go back, I will try to see what I can do to just be a little bit more gentle and just let those thoughts go without, keep observing, but try to decrease the energy. And you're welcome to, there's a great thought that your brain, you can kind of treat your brain like you're an innkeeper. Any thought is welcome, and they enter and then they leave when they're done. So you're very free to kind of pass through and make your way along your journey. Paul, I saw your hand before.
Sure. So this came up as after I had been working with a customer, it was a very difficult customer, and I found that I was really an old pattern of mine is trying to control all the outcomes. So if I'm trying to set up a meeting and I'm trying to put together an email about this, I'm trying to put the email in such a way that it will be well received by the other person. So I try to imagine them, based on my experience with them, how they would respond to this. And in this case, the other person had been very difficult to have any sort of a positive interaction with, and yet I needed to reach out and see about setting up a meeting. And so I realized that what I was doing is I was trying to control this. I became aware that my hesitancy in finishing an email was because, oh, he's not going to like this, oh, he's going to say this, oh, he's going to say that. And I'm in a 12-step program, and part of what I'm working on is not trying to control things, not trying to be at the at being controlled by others, by me trying to control them, if that makes any sense. So once I realized that, I thought, I just have to put down, this is what I want to do. If he does it, he does. If he doesn't, he doesn't. There's nothing I can do about it. And then I was at peace. It was really an interesting minor victory. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. I listen with an open heart. And, I'm a huge believer that those minor victories are really the whole game, because most life is, thank goodness, small stakes. So if we can get these minor victories in small stakes situation and be a little bit more at peace, that's all those little pieces add up to big changes. Wendy.
Well, based on what everybody was saying about the dishes, I wrote in the chat last week, I like to do the dishes. And so I thought, well, I'm going to figure out why I like to do the dishes. Here's a dish. I don't know if you guys can really see it that well.
Very pretty.
But in doing the dishes, I'm thinking about the artist who did the dishes, Kate Spade, and some of you might know that she took her own life. And whenever I do my dishes, I'm thinking about the artist, and I'm thinking about how fortunate I am to have this dish. And this reminded me actually of Hanukkah, because it was like a million little candles. And I guess I just think about something else while I'm doing the dishes that, makes my life feel better or something. I don't know. I just like to do the dishes. And I guess that was about all I did, was just think about that.
Well, that's great, Wendy. Thanks for sharing that. This is about self-reflective learning, and there's no right or wrong way to do that. And realizing that you were using this as an opportunity to connect with someone else, to honor someone's memory, to appreciate the joy of their work, and how fortunate it is to have, all of us have these household items, but usually it's just something, even my wedding china is from Lenox, although I have my grandmother's wedding china, which makes me think of her. But, it's like, I don't have a person that's connected with this. So that's nice. And if you ever want to come over and develop a personal relationship with my dishes, I would be happy to welcome you, to do that. Okay, so thank you all for sharing that. Let's go a little bit deeper. Now, each week we will be looking at one of these key concepts from the Tikkun Middot Curriculum. And the second one is that the evil inclination is a poor translation of the Yetzer Hara, because it's not necessarily negative, it is our teacher. Now, you might remember from our past sessions, I would talk about the conflict between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov, and looking to try to guide the Yetzer Hara. So I really think this is an interesting take on that, because again, if I can look at the example that I shared earlier about all these judgmental feelings. And on the one hand, I could say, okay, well, by having these judgmental thoughts, that was the Yetzer Hara, that was the evil inclination trying to get the upper hand. But I also say, and if I stop and look at it, it's like, wow, that's really pointing to me that I have some work to do with my judgments about judging other people, and when I get bored or when my butt gets sore, I tend to start like getting out the judging clipboard. So that's, thankfully I did not speak those things and I could let those thoughts leave, but I really like that lens of being able to say, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I turn this observation into maybe a change in my life? Other thoughts about maybe the Yetzer Hara being a friend? Carol.
When I was still studying with Cantor Unterman in the spirituality group, when he still was running that, one of the things we talked about was, in fact, the evil inclination. And his take on it was that it's only evil if it's excessive. And because without the Yetzer Hara, nothing would ever get done. There would be no babies born. There would be nothing built. There would be no money earned, because those are all the natural drives for your survival.
Yeah.
And they're not, as a result, he said, it's not negative. It's only negative when you are a glutton or sleep with someone you shouldn't sleep with, or, are too greedy.
Right.
And that always stuck with me.
Yeah, those are wonderful examples. Thank you, Carol. All right, so given like these backgrounds, we're now going to start to delve into this teaching from Pirkei Avot, from one of my favorite masters in the Talmud, Ben Zoma. May I have a volunteer to read this, please?
Who is wise? One who learns from every person. As it says, from all my students, I gained wisdom.
Thank you. Okay, so what is going on here? What does that mean, learning from every person, or from all my students, I gained wisdom?
To me, it's a reciprocal experience. I taught for years before I became head of school, and I love teaching 4th and 5th graders, which is what I taught, and public school, day school. And I learned from them. They all had different backgrounds, especially when I taught inner city in the late 60s, early 70s. And in many ways, it let me know how sheltered my growing up was. And how I didn't know the term privileged. I never thought of the term privilege then, but looking back on it, yes, privileged. And how things that I took for granted. Example, these are kids who's in the 4 years I taught inner city before I went to day school. These are kids who lived in what we would call in that era the project. And if their parents had an 8th grade education, that was really good. And my mother in the 30s went to college and graduate school. Even though she lived at home, she went to Columbia. And I realized that it was a privileged family.
Hmm.
I took a lot of things for granted when I was growing up. I just thought it's a nice middle-class family. Everybody does this. Everybody saves for college. So I just had to watch my kids. I taught in a school that was a Title I school. So we provided breakfast and lunch.
Hmm. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for sharing that wonderful example. Other thoughts about what it means to learn from every person? Is this something easy to do? So.
Hi, it's Jane.
Okay.
I really think it depends upon your mindset. If you're open or closed, if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to know that you don't know everything.
Mhm.
I had a patient many years ago who told me he's been in so much pain, he started researching what to do without using pain meds, and it worked. So I tried it and it worked.
Mm.
And I tell other people the same thing. So I think it's just a willingness to not be, think you're too good or better than, and listening.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, is keeping our ego in check, not feeling superior to someone else. And, you know, that's great. Thank you.
This reminds me of Passover and how much we learn from the questions that are coming from the children around the table. We often have a lot of kids and they don't really have any Judaism in their life except for coming from us. So they're asking questions, and in having to come up with the answers, we're learning.
Yeah, thank you. Sure, that's a great observation. So yeah, it's Passover, but this isn't, you know, we're teaching the children to ask questions, and it's our job to answer them. So some of you may have seen the reading that I shared in the email from Rabbi Lisa Goldstein. And here's a couple of, here's a short excerpt. May I have a volunteer to read this, please?
I'll read.
Thanks, Joanne.
Sometimes Hitlamdut, cultivating a lens of openness and curiosity, is simple and inspiring. It is reawakening a childlike wonder that brings joy and gratitude and a sense of belonging to this life. Should I continue?
Yes, please.
That is not my experience these days, given everything going on. Childlike wonder seems impossibly naive and perhaps even foolish. And yet, these days are exactly the context in which to bring the wisdom of Hitlamdut, that embodied, fully engaged curiosity.
Thank you. So to the group, what is Rabbi Goldstein saying about Hitlamdut and curiosity?
I think what she's saying partly is that we snuff this out as we grow up, and we can learn a lot from watching children and being aware of their openness and maybe having it rub off on us. Like taking a child just to a garden, you see things very differently.
Yes. Carol.
It's easy to learn when you're in a nice situation, when you can be open, like taking a child to a garden, as Janet said, or taking yourself to a garden. But when things are really difficult, or when people are really difficult, and you know, people are confrontational, annoying, even scary, it's a whole lot more difficult to learn from them because you're so like protecting yourself. And I think one of the, she transposes, contrasts those two things, that this wonder and everything. And then she says, that's not my experience these days, given everything going on.
That was in
Yeah.
2019.
Yeah, that was in 2018. She really thought she had it bad in 2018. You know, how much more so today, you know, oh, my childlike wonder about the pandemic, you know, that's a much heavier lift than taking the child to the garden, for sure. For sure. And yet, she says, maybe that's exactly what we need. How might that work? Can we just flip the wonder switch? Yeah, Wendy.
Well, I'm thinking curiosity begets curiosity and takes you deeper and deeper and deeper into the learning. So that if you're curious about something and you kind of find out something just like about the surface of it, then you're going to want to go deeper. I'm just thinking of like with animals, or plants, science. Just the deeper you go, the deeper you have to go.
Yeah. Paul and then Bonnie.
There's actually something you had said a little bit earlier when we were talking about, inviting your thoughts or your inner thoughts, I guess, in, or your responses in, and then making sure that they make their way through, that they don't stick around, that you just kind of graciously accept it, and then you have them move on. And I think that kind of a practice helps us to be curious about myself as well as other people. And I think that what I got from reading that is that, it's important certainly to be able to be curious and open to other people, but being able to be curious and open to ourselves, I think, can be just as hard. And that the cultivation you're talking about, I think, helps with both in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Bonnie, did you have something you wanted to add?
No.
Oh, okay. Jane.
Hi, I was thinking about one of the tenets of Judaism is to learn. We're doing that. And to be open to learning takes you into a different place. And is a place of appreciation also. Pulling out that child inside to enjoy watching the squirrels chase each other up the tree, or the flight of a heron, appreciating these moments that are really appreciating life and not taking it for granted.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do have something.
Okay.
I was thinking of, as we read Torah each year, whether it's the whole Parsha or in the conservative movement, it's thirds. Each time I read it, there's something new that I find. And I'm sure I don't, people weren't talking about brains and that kind of responses when this was set in motion. But it makes sense to me that each time I read, and I've read it each year, it's new.
Thank you, Bonnie. David.
Yeah, I think back that over the past year that it was easier to have a lot more curiosity to figure out, what was the right thing to do. Thinking about going out to the store, and then, you go back a year ago and there were so many different things to thinking about, and the curiosity of how going about to make those decisions and weighing risks was something that I didn't have to think about previously. I didn't have to think about, whether it was safe to go shopping, to do different things. And so there was a lot of that thought and curiosity and wonder and figuring out, sometimes through science, sometimes through gut,
Mhm.
what was best for me and my family.
Yeah, thank you, David. That makes me think back to like going to the store, and sometimes, just in my experience, the alternative to curiosity was like terror. Just sort of cowering. Just sort of being at home, being afraid. Being curious at least was like, well, is it really? There's like in my area, there's not very many cases, and if I wear a mask, and I used to wear gloves then, am I really at risk? And it's better than, eating the canned soup from 2 years ago that we have in our earthquake preparedness kit. It's probably better to, go out and get some fresh food. So yeah. Okay, so we have talked about, all right, so first we already did that. Learning from all people, learning from our students. Then we have, okay, maybe one aspect of that learning is curiosity, because that sort of opens the door, and not being too, not being arrogant, and being curious and willing to be engaged. And then we have a commentary from Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv, who was one of the students of Rabbi Israel Salanter, who created the Musar movement in the 19th century. So may I have a volunteer to read this, please?
I'll read it. When a tailor meets someone, they will immediately look at their clothes. Another type of person would not see or hear any of these things because their heart is not given to inquire and investigate. If one is not engaged in such activities, one will not notice them.
Great, thank you, Karina. Let's just pause there. So they talked about it. He talked about a tailor, and I cut this down, and then about, a shoemaker, and about a merchant. But people, and can you maybe think of the things that you're interested in? Like if you're shopping for a new car, you'll notice everybody's car. Or if you're into books, you'll look at the books that are in someone's house. Does that kind of make sense, the point that he's making?
When we needed to replace our roof, I noticed every roof. I don't notice roofs anymore.
Yes. Yes, suddenly the roof becomes the most interesting part of the neighborhood, for that window of 2 weeks when you're looking for a roof, and then it fades away. Okay, so Karina, please continue.
Oh, sure. One who learns from every person is a great merchant of wisdom. They trade in everything, and thus they understand the necessity to learn from the other, and thus is called wise.
Great, thank you. Okay, so what's the point that he's making here?
I think it means they're like they have that openness and curiosity, and so it doesn't block them from inquiry and from learning from other people, or being aware of the world around them, or their behavior. And I think they're just more observant or mindful, as we say today.
Yeah, wonderful. So I heard a couple of key phrases: being aware of the world around them, being mindful, being observant. What else? What else might go into this?
Oh, well, to open up your mind and see beyond your own interest. When I was first diagnosed with cancer, somebody said to me, the surgeon's going to want to do surgery. The radiation oncologist is going to want to radiate. The medical oncologist is going to want to do chemotherapy. So that's their specialty. That's what you need to open. If you open up beyond your specialty, you see a bigger picture and you learn a lot more too.
Mm.
I was an English major, and I needed to, when I got into teaching, I was teaching everything. And I needed to open myself up to science and math in ways that I never had before. And it wasn't always easy, but it certainly was a learning experience.
Yeah, thank you. Jane.
This makes me think about growing up, well, no, not growing up, partially, being able to listen to my grandfather, who I called Poppy, tell stories
Mm.
about Judaism or anything else, and how the idea of revering older people and their wisdom grew from that time.
Mm.
And so it struck me as it's important to listen, because you don't know what you'll find out about, which you may or may not apply to your life, but it's certainly worth learning about.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy.
I'm thinking of an inquisitive person who isn't satisfied with just hearing like a basic answer, but then will inquire further and get more and more information, and thus becomes wise. That's what I was thinking about. I was actually thinking about somebody that I know that's like that. Two people I know that's like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some people, it's like it's always new roof season. They're always looking for a new car. They're always, thinking about getting surgery. It's just whatever the topic, it seems like they're looking for an opportunity to learn. Hey, Karina, could you please read the third bullet?
Certainly. The one who learns from all people learns from the other all that they have to teach, even things that until now were outside the realm of their interests. The one who learns from all people is open to learning from everything that they see in the world.
I'm wondering, was there like a time when you found yourself learning something in a really unexpected way? Like you opened yourself up maybe a little bit more than usual, and suddenly, there was a lesson for you there when you didn't expect it.
I think it's always awesome to learn from kids. They say the darndest things, and they have such amazing insight. Having kids, having grandchildren. I worked in a school as a school social worker, not a great area, but for a long time. And they say the darndest things, and they're so honest, and it's just awesome to watch and see.
Thank you, Jane. Wow, we have a lot of teachers, a lot of people that work from kids in this group, with kids in this group, I'm seeing.
Well, I had an interesting experience where I had to do something medical I never thought I would be able to do. I was taking care of a horse, and I had to administer medication to this mare. And also I had to milk her udder, which was really infected. And I thought, oh, I can never do that. I was real squeamish about it. Fortunately, the mare was amazing. She was very sweet. But I learned so much. I learned not only about the horse, which of course I learned about the horse, and I learned about how you medicate and how you deal with a situation like this, but I learned some things about myself too. I learned that I could do things I didn't think that I would ever be able to do, and it wouldn't gross me out completely, and it didn't. Fortunately, as I say, the horse was pretty kind. She's hard to give the medicine to because she tried to spit it out, but the other she was really good with, so I was fortunate.
Yeah, so often these challenges or challenging people can teach us about ourselves. Yeah, Eileen. You're on mute still.
Learning the most when you get outside your comfort zone, when you're learning from those that are least like you.
Mm.
Yeah.
is so important to me.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the, it's harder to meet people who are not like us these days. Just people tend to travel in, and at least I do, I tend to travel in a certain circle and see a certain level of people. It's not like, I guess that's one really nice thing about being in the trans-denominational school is I meet all kinds of people of all kinds of ages, and it is really challenging sometimes with someone who has a very different way they practice Judaism, or someone who's really young and has different expectations about, justice, gender, and, are they judging me? And, all kinds of like challenges come up. So it's sort of energizing and it's challenging at the same time.
I was watching TV yesterday, and these people from Idaho were explaining to the news person on CNN why they were not getting shots for COVID, why they didn't feel it was necessary. And it was very easy for me to think to myself, they're stupid. But I know they're not stupid. I'm wondering what I can learn from them. What is, let's face it, I live in Palo Alto. It seems like everybody is smart here. And what can I learn from these other people who sit around in the diner and don't think that getting a shot is something they need to do? I'm troubled by that.
I'm sorry. I think you should learn that they are not the brightest people. I'm sorry.
Well, I think we need to be careful with the judgments, and I think it is really hard to step back and to say, well, how can I be curious? What's this person's life is like? If I'd had their experiences, maybe I wouldn't want to get the shot. And so it can be a painful exercise, but it's also an important, way to learn and grow too. Yeah, Jane.
So about 6 years ago, the guy I was dating, I knew his family for a while. And unbeknownst to me, his sister had severe depression. And I'm very good at assessing. I missed it. And then she had killed herself. And the comments were, how could she do this to her children? And she wasn't thinking of her children. She wasn't thinking. And to be able to help someone understand the mindset that is going on and help them make some sense out of something horrific, because it was not a normal suicide by a woman, helped a number of people be able to make a little bit more sense out of it, be a little bit more at peace. I don't know why I brought that up, it just, but helping people see a different perspective. And the fact that they were open to listening when they're grieving struck me as something quite special, actually.
Well, thank you, Jane. I'm listening with an open heart.
So
Yeah, Bonnie, one more comment and then we'll get
So I
ready
have
to
a very different experience. A year ago, I was in Africa for 5 weeks. I spent the first 4 or 5 days in the jungles of West Africa, tracking the gorillas. I then spent 5 days in the Abu Udaya community in East Africa, in Mabale, which is a 100-year-old Black Jewish community. It's part of the conservative movement. I spent time in the classrooms. I have never seen a kindergarten room where kids are sitting in long, narrow desks. It's not a desk, it's a row. with no play areas, none of the things that we would look for in a developmental kindergarten. Lots of rote learning. I did some staff development. And then I spent Kabbalat Shabbat and Shabbat and Sunday with them. And it was the most amazing experience I've had in a very long time in a Jewish setting. And the way they celebrated Shabbat, I watched the shochet. This is not something I've ever done before, even though I keep kosher. I watched the shochet with the chicken and said, I'm not watching it with the goat. I'll see that afterward.
I watched the goat.
You watched the goat. So I wasn't up to watching the goat. I ate a piece of goat and said, thank you very much. I'll have another piece of chicken, please. But everything from tossing the rice so that the little tiny stones are not in the food and tossing them out. I've never tossed rice before. The service was a service I'm familiar with. I'm not familiar with the language. So it was in English, it was in Hebrew, and it was in the Ugandan language. It was an amazing experience. They've asked me to come back. My plan is to go back for a month and spend some time back in the jungle, because there were 2 nonprofits I was working with, and then back with the Abba Yudaya community. It was an eye-opening experience. And what I've been working on is I brought PJ library books, is collecting, getting PJ to send them. And if not getting PJ to send, if PJ doesn't want to send them, then there are hundreds of PJ library books in all the used bookstores, raising some funds to send them to Uganda. And going from one country to another, I stood behind a guy from San Francisco who ships to Kenya and Uganda. Hello, how did that happen? And he may be the one that we're going to ship with. And I came across his address and everything the other day when I was cleaning out my desk.
I call that a God moment.
It was absolutely a God moment. How did that happen? Going into, where was I going into? I'll think of that in a second. Where Victoria Falls is.
That's amazing.
The whole trip was, and it's my 3rd trip to Africa. It's not like, every time it's something different.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. That's, it sounds like a lot of opportunities to learn from a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. And now we're going to have a time to do some exploration with each other. So we're going to talk about our practice for the week. And last week we were observing ourselves, and this is to lead us into a practice of observing other people. So from the Talmud, the rabbi teaches that the Torah portion about the one who does not drink wine is next to the portion about the suspected adulteress. Why? To imply that she was drunk, and that one would swear off drinking if they saw the terrible consequences that drinking can lead to. The teaching is that when we see someone having a hard time, rather than blame them for their struggles, we should look at ourselves and know that we are vulnerable to the same problems. Kind of like what, this reminds me of the story Janet was sharing. It's like, what was going on with these people who don't want to shop? And, what would lead me to that point? So our practice is going to be to notice what you can learn from the small actions of others at least 3 times a day. And I know this may be a little harder when we're isolated, but we want to notice what others are doing with an eye towards what we can learn. So with your partner, discuss some times and places that you can learn from others. And of course, you have the option to set up a time to kind of meet with them before we get together next week, if you want to go a little bit deeper and just kind of share how things are going. This week, I will try to remember to set out a notification when we're about halfway through. So I will now open the breakout rooms. So on your screen, you should see a little join breakout room button. Joanne, do you see the breakout room button there? You're unmuted, so I don't know if you're asking a question. I am hoping. Well, if you are on the live streaming, this is when we say goodbye for the day. Thank you so much for being here. I invite you to come by the AmericanMussar.com website if you would like to join in person next time. You can go by the American Mussar YouTube page, or you can look at other, you can see the full recording of this when I upload it in a few days, or you can see some of the back gatherings of Jewish wisdom for coping with the pandemic. Special thank you again for IJS for making the, allowing me to purchase this wonderful curriculum, and I will see you next week. Hello and welcome back. So how was that experience? Would anyone like to share kind of a practice they thought about, or a time or person they'd like to learn from, without mentioning that person's name on, of course. Yeah, Wendy.
Well, just in general, we kind of came up with this idea that during the week, we're going to learn from people who we disagree with. And we're going to learn new things, like new recipes for, say, coffee, for some things that we maybe didn't like, maybe to actually appreciate and like something. And so there was no talking about individual people or anything, but just the general.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Trying to learn from people who maybe aren't on our top 10 list, and trying to learn to cook things that aren't on our favorite foods list to see if we might get a different appreciation or learn something. Thank you so much. Who else? I know for me, I thought about what is it that I'm going to focus on this week. And so I thought, given that I was watching myself during my Zoom classes last week, this week, I will try to watch other people in the Zoom classes and see what I can learn from them, from the professors, from my fellow students, and maybe I'll, the people who, maybe aren't my favorites. I'll see what I can learn from them and what I can learn from the people who are. It's a great learning opportunity. And once again, I will take notes in the margins of my notebook. Yeah, Carol.
I'm so isolated that I don't see other people, very, very seldom. So I'm mostly on Zoom, and it's like 2 days a week, maybe 3 or 4, depending on what's going on that week, but regularly two days a week. So maybe I'm going to just sit in my window over here and watch the people that walk by and see what I can learn by observing how they interact with each other. And also to watch people on Zoom, but you're not seeing, there's a lot of information that doesn't come through on the screen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and learn people's body language, I think, a little bit, just by watching, both on Zoom, but also just watching the people that walk by and maybe wave and say hi. I don't know.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carol.
Well, I'm leaving Sunday on a tour visiting other vaccinated people, friends of mine. And I'm going to learn how it is to interact and be with other human beings.
Mhm.
So we have like 5 different people on our way between here and New Hampshire.
Uh-huh. Wonderful. Well, have a wonderful time, David. That's I'm more than a little envious, but I think that is great. I shall vicariously enjoy your experience of seeing people. Anyone else care to share? All right, well, let us take this opportunity then to close our sacred space. Once more, let's close our eyes. Taking a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And in our mind, let's bring up an image of ourself watching someone else. Notice the curiosity, your body language, the openness, the resilience if they're doing something that you don't like. Just being able to watch, observe, and to try to learn without becoming agitated or annoyed. We can watch ourselves watching others and learn as we watch ourselves learning from others. Now tilt your head back and open your mouth with a smile. Let's take a moment of gratitude for having this opportunity to share spiritual community together today. May our hearts remain open as we go about our lives in this coming week. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you again next week. If you're watching the recording, thank you so much for taking the time to do so. Please feel free to come by the American Mussar website and sign up for our email list and join us in person next time. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you all.